You can't preserve your wealth for long periods of time in a fiat currency. And so the real promise of Bitcoin is very simple. It's a bank in cyberspace that won't steal your money. And it's an asset that you can store your life savings in that nobody can debase or corrupt. And if you have a long time horizon, if you're going to hold it more than 4 years, you don't care about the volatility. All you care about is the annualized return.
What if your money is quietly disappearing right under your nose? It's happening to everyone, and it's not just inflation, it's something much worse. Michael Saylor breaks down how the dollar is stealing your wealth and why you need to act fast. Stay tuned to discover why keeping your money in cash is a dangerous mistake.
The simple answer is the supply of dollars expands about 7% a year every year for the past 100 years. And what that means is that if you want to buy something that is a very scarce, desirable asset that the government can't make more of and that manufacturers can't make more of, if technology and capital and machinery and robots can't make more of it, it's scarce and desirable. Here's an example. An acre of beachfront property in Palm Beach, or a beachfront house in the Hamptons, or waterfront property in Miami Beach. That's a desirable place to live. You can't make more of it. And if you go back 100 years, you'll see that the value of that acre was $10,000. And you go forward 100 years, and that is about $10 million. And for those who are very quick at math, they'll realize that works out to 7% increase in price every year for 100. That's why people buy houses for $100 million on the beach in Palm Beach. And my house, the house that I'm in right now, it was sold in 1930, and I have the deed on my wall, and it was sold for $100,000 in 1930. If you'd put that $100,000 in a vault and you kept it safe and sound for the 90 years, and if you took it out, it would pay about 8 to 12 weeks of my property tax on this house. No, you're correct. In essence, the inflation of the dollar supply means that your wealth is cut in half every 10 years if you hold all your wealth in cash. And it's the rule of 72, right? You divide 7% into 72. That's the half-life of the asset. So the half-life of your wealth is 10 years if you store it in cash. If someone gives you an asset you can invest in that goes up 7% a year, you're keeping up with inflation. You're not getting wealthier, but you're not getting poorer. You're just treading water, And if you're beating that hurdle rate, then you're getting a bit wealthier. So once you understand that, you can see that you can't preserve your wealth for long periods of time in a fiat currency. The best fiat currency in the world is the dollar, but in most other currencies, they inflate at 14% a year. And that means the half-life of your wealth is 5 years. But in a weak currency, like in Turkey or Syria or Iraq or Venezuela or Argentina, it used to be for 20 years, the inflation rate looks more like 28% a year or 30% a year. And we take example, the peso. The peso went from 1 peso to the dollar to 1,000 pesos to the dollar over 20 years.
Jesus.
In America, you got to keep in mind, you're an American. You live in the greatest country of the last 100 years. America won every war, right? We were the winner of World War I. We got richer. We were the winner of World War II. We never lost a war. We were the winners of the century. Our currency lost 99.9% of its economic power over the 100 years. But if you went to Nigeria or like Germany, the currency crashed like 3 times, 2 or 3 times, right? In Japan, the currency crashed, In Russia, it crashed last time the Russian currency crashed in 98. The Brazilian currency crashed completely 25 years ago. The Argentine currency crashed about 4 times in 100 years. So if you're an Argentinian and you're 30 years old, you already know what it's like to have hyperinflation because you lived the entire cycle. It's just Americans don't. And so if you're taking advice from an American business person like Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, they didn't live through the Weimar Republic. They didn't live through the collapse of the current. By the way, the currency collapsed in Venezuela. It collapsed in Argentina. It collapsed in Brazil. It collapsed in Cuba. It collapsed in Russia. It collapsed in every single country in Africa. You see? And so foreigners actually get it a bit better, right? It's like the bank's going to take your money. The currency's going to zero. The government's going to promise you it'll be okay and tell you to put your money in the bank. Then they're going to inflate the currency, freeze your bank account, crash the currency, and then tell you it's worthless. That's what happened in Cyprus not too long ago, if you want to go and Google that. And so the real promise of Bitcoin is very simple. It's a bank in cyberspace that won't steal your money, and it's an asset that you can store your life savings in that nobody can debase or corrupt. And those are two powerful promises for the first time in the history of the human race. No one ever gave you those two promises ever before now.
Michael Saylor discusses the silent erosion of wealth over time, explaining how the US dollar has lost nearly all its value over the last century. He gives the example of property, which only loses value as the government prints more. Saylor calls this inflation a form of theft, as your purchasing power shrinks. He also highlights that in weaker currencies around the world, like Venezuela or Argentina, people are already familiar with hyperinflation and its devastating effects. With inflation at around 7% annually, your wealth could be halved every 10 years if stored in cash. But Bitcoin offers a solution, an asset that can't be debased or corrupted. Stay tuned to find out why Bitcoin might just be the safest bet for your wealth.
If I could give the math, the risk-free rate of the dollar, if you're capitalized on US dollars and you were to say buy treasury bonds, the risk-free rate is something close to SOFR, or the standard overnight funding rate. And that ranges, but after you get paid that rate and you get taxed on it, you might get paid 5%, you get to keep 3% after tax. Maybe if you're tax-free, you get 4.5%, and if you're taxed, you get 3%. So the risk-free rate of return of your capital on that dollar standard is like in the 3% range. The risk-free rate for Bitcoin, as I just described it to you, 29% over 21 years, about 30%. So the way I look at investments is when you're pitching me an investment idea, I say, well, I've got a lot of money in Bitcoin and I'm expecting about 30% risk-free for the next 20 years. You have to actually pitch me an idea that generates more than 30%, plus the risk premium, plus the tax efficiency. If you told me, here's a thing that'll make me 50% a year, but it was going to be taxable, that might be 40% a year or 35% a year. And I'm like, well, after the risk, it's still not as good as my risk-free rate of 30%. So if you're capitalized on Bitcoin, if you understand it, and if you understand, if you have a long time horizon, if you're going to hold it more than 4 years, you don't care about the volatility. All you care about is the annualized return. Yeah, so, well, the dollar is zero ARR, zero volatility. That is to say, the dollar goes up 0% against itself each year, and the dollar is zero volatility against itself each year. So if you're on the dollar, you're living in flat land, and you're a stationary person in flat land, a pedestrian in flat land. Bitcoin is going up 60% a year against the dollar. How long? Well, since MicroStrategy made its first investment 4 years ago, it's 60%. But if you stretch back 6, 8, 10 years, I think it's also 60%, so like a decade. But you can measure it back a decade and you see it's going up 60% a year, and it's 60 volatility. It's a 60 vol against the dollar. So you should think of Bitcoin as an asset. It's like you're on a speeding train going 60 miles an hour, and you've got a flywheel spinning 60 RPM. And the pedestrian on flat land is standing on the plane watching the train go by, thinking this is scary. It's going to suck the oxygen out of my lungs. And they're thinking my money isn't an asset because it goes up 0% a year. So they have a different view toward money than the view of someone on the Bitcoin train. The person with $1 million of cash is going to have $1 million of cash in a decade. A person with $1 million of Bitcoin is going to double their capital every 18 months if they just hold on to it, right? And so they're going to double it once, twice, 3, 4 times at that rate, right? Howard Marks would say volatility is not risk. Volatility is volatility, right? A merry-go-round, or a carnival ride or a roller coaster is volatile. The risk part is if you fly off the roller coaster, right? If the merry-go-round stops working, etc. So the fundamental risk of Bitcoin is the existential risk of an extinction level event and Bitcoin, right? If space aliens come down and say, we're taking your Bitcoin away from you, right? Then I guess there's risk. If some evil genius finds a way to create a cyber virus that infects and destroys the Bitcoin network instantly, irrevocably, that is the risk. So, but that's kind of like that's the existential risk you take when you get on the airplane. If it crashes, that's the existential risk you take when you cross the street. That's the existential risk you take when you put a piece of food in your mouth. And I say, and you say, well, can you imagine that hurting me? And I say, yeah, if I put poison in the food, you're dead. Okay, so do you trust me? Do you trust the waiter when you put the food in your mouth, right? So yes, there is some risk in life, and the existential risk is that extinction level event.
If you're not protecting your wealth, you're watching it disappear. Michael Saylor's insights on how the dollar and other currencies are eroding your savings are a wake-up call. Don't let inflation steal your future. Bitcoin offers a chance to safeguard your wealth. If you want to know more about how to keep your money safe, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss a crucial update.